ground beef color has many components to what dictates what a consumer sees in the grocery store. And first, I'll start with, why does meat have color? It's based on a protein called myoglobin that's inherent in the muscle. And the myoglobin, because of the structure it has ability to deal with or handle oxygen differently. So the myoglobin protein and oxygen are the kind of the chemistry behind why we see the color that we do. So the reason we see various colors of meat or variations of a usually a reddish color of meat in the retail case, it has a lot of components to it. But the various factors and why you see it are time, temperature, and conditions over a length of time. So ground beef comes from the whole muscle, and the time from the grind to being in the package is a factor. It gives it more time to be exposed to oxygen. So there's also time from when the meat was ground till it actually gets in the package, and the type of package, because that also protects it from the oxygen. And so a lot of that, the packaging can dictate what a consumer will see, but also the age of the meat at the time it was ground. In fact, the age of the animal at the time it was harvested that the muscle in the meat comes from, because younger animals actually have less myoglobin. Thus, you get maybe not quite as bright of red just inherently from the age the animal was. Additionally, there's grind size. It's a plate that the meat goes through to make smaller particles. The different sizes of the plate create a different particle size and reflects light differently. So it gets kind of complicated and sciencey, but it is a factor. Some consumers prefer a different grind size than others, depending on how they're going to use it. Then we get into the fat versus lean content. And on a package, you will see it probably as a lean percentage. An 80-20 means 80% lean, 20% fat. There's 70-30, there's 90-10. Each of those, because they have different, lean or the reddish part of the meat, the muscle part of the meat versus the fat, again, reflects light differently. So it's a little bit of a play for the eye. So there's a lot involved in what you see in the retail case. And the bottom line is color is not indicative of necessarily of quality or food safety. It's just a lot of it is natural variation. So color of meat. Again, we know from research, market and consumer research, that consumers shop with their eye. That's especially true in meat and other products as well. But a consumer tends to see with beef, they expect a certain degree of a, we call it a bright cherry red, and we just know that consumers desire that. So they may perceive a quality or a possibly even a food safety concern based on a color of meat. Not a fair correlation. Colors is varied, and it isn't indicative of necessarily what the taste experience is going to be. Well, that is a somewhat of a common misconception of ground beef in consumers' minds when they see brown. There's tends to be an inherent association or negative connotation that it must not be fresh. Very interesting with meat color and especially ground beef. The brownish color, if it's found in the center of a brick of meat, so if you went to the store, bought a 1 pound, I call it chubber brick of ground beef, and you come home and you cut it open, or you break it open, you're ready to crumble it in the pan. If there's actually brown in the center of it, that can be an indicator that it's actually fresher than some others. That is because there was very low access to oxygen. The oxygen is having a hard time. It just hasn't penetrated to the center of that chub or brick. And because of what we know about that color chemistry, it just hasn't fully bloomed. Oxygen makes the bright red color. The brownish in the middle is actually indicative that it was more freshly ground. And again, oxygen just hadn't gotten to it. And that's why the outside is bright red because for a period of time, the myoglobin and the oxygen make this great red color that we know consumers like. That is an interesting question, and I'll really answer it with no one of them is necessarily better. One of them may be better for a consumer's specific need or a plan they may have with storage. Again, in ground beef, what we tend to see in retail are four options. Probably most traditional is the foam overwrap tray. So picture the white or yellow tray with a chub or a brick of meat on it. It's overwrapped with a thin film, and that's most traditional. With that, some pros and cons. There's a low cost of packaging, might be more affordable buying in that format. But what comes with that is a higher permeability to oxygen, meaning oxygen can pass through that film. It's thin. There is a still, while it keeps foreign material out, it does allow oxygen to pass through. So it looks great. It's bright red, but that film not only lets oxygen through over time. If you were to put that in the freezer, for instance, and you didn't come home and use it right away, in the freezer, you're also getting migration of moisture, and you would probably get some freezer burns, surface drying. And so that would not be a format to buy if you're going to go home, not use it by the use date, and plan to throw it in the freezer. Or two more common ones at true retail are what we call chubs, and those are tend to be 1 pound, almost like little tubes of meat in a plastic type wrap. They're clipped on the end. That plastic is fairly impermeable, meaning oxygen's not going to pass through. The color that's inside of it is going to be pretty maintained. The consumer can't see it, but that is a good situation for a bit longer shelf life and is okay for putting in the freezer. And finally, there's a what we call a rigid modified atmosphere tray. Now you'll see those as a little bit deeper depth, and they have a film over the top. They're pretty sturdy tray. We call those in our industry map. And there's a combination of an atmosphere in there designed to maintain the color, give extended shelf life, and those are not ideal for freezing. You'll get more shelf life in your refrigerator, in your home. Um, but over time, it wouldn't be ideal long term in the freezer. What would be ideal for the freezer is the old traditional butcher paper wrap. So white paper wrap, freezer paper is designed for the freezer. You may bring that home if you were to buy bulk ground beef from the service counter at the grocery store or from your local locker plant. They might be in traditional butcher paper, and that does keep some of the dehydration, surface dehydration, and ice crystals from forming if you put it in the freezer. Well, that's similar to what we talked about earlier in ground beef. Again, a tray with a thin film over it is allowing oxygen to pass through. The brown spots you may see typically are because there was a sticker, probably the price sticker or some other branding attribute on the film that's on that piece of steak. Interestingly, that sticker is keeping oxygen from coming through in that area of the film. So when you unwrapped it, if you were to lay the film back down on it, that is probably where a certain price sticker or label was sitting. The brown spot is again that it was blocking some of the oxygen coming through the film and allowing that myoglobin that we talked about earlier to fully bloom or be as red as it typically is when it gets more oxygen exposed to it. So it's simply just that there was probably a label or sticker. It's not a quality issue. It's not a flavor issue. So there seems to be a lot of conversations, or friends will debate whether they should buy or shop at the local butcher versus going to the big box store and buying from the retail case at the store. And you can hear debates about one's better than the other. Often I get asked, can you settle that debate? Is one better? Should I buy local versus at the local locker versus the grocery store? And the answer is both are wonderful sources of product and meat to put and serve to your family. The differences you may see if the discussion is around color, some will say, "Well, I think I get better colored meat products when I buy local versus what I saw at the bigger grocery store." They may be exactly the same, and the product may be very different. And it comes back to, we don't know what the age of the animal was at harvest. We may not know what grind size they used. Did you look at equal lean to fat content? Talked about that earlier. And how was the product handled in terms of time and temperature while it was ground, until it got into the package, until it got into the display case, until it got into your home? All of those impact the color you'll see when you ultimately get ready to prepare it. And it's generally, it's not what I'll call an apples to apples comparison of if you bought locally versus, again, at the larger stores. Just not a fair comparison. And again, the color is not indicative of a quality or flavor experience.